The sun had barely crested the Chugach Mountains when Captain Sarah Chen pulled on her flight helmet, the familiar weight of it settling onto her shoulders like an old friend. The pre-dawn air at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson bit through her flight suit with that particular Alaskan cold that seemed to find every gap in the fabric. She'd been flying F-22 Raptors for 12 years now, and mornings like this still gave her that electric thrill in her spine, the anticipation of defying gravity in the most advanced fighter jet ever built. "Coffee's terrible today," Lieutenant Marcus Webb said, appearing beside her with 2 steaming cups from the ready room. He handed her one with a grin that made him look younger than his 28 years. "I mean, it's always terrible, but today it's especially terrible." Sarah accepted the cup gratefully, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Marcus was good people, sharp, eager, and skilled enough to keep up with her in the air. This was his first winter in Alaska, and he was still adjusting to the reality that darkness could last 20 hours and cold could make metal shriek in protest. He joined her squadron 6 months ago, fresh from advanced training, hungry to prove he belonged among the elite pilots who flew the Raptor. "You ready for this?" Sarah asked, glancing at the 2 F-22s waiting on the tarmac like sleeping predators. Their angular surfaces caught the emerging light, making them look almost alien against the conventional hangars. "Testing new comm systems over the wilderness," Marcus shrugged. "Sounds like a Tuesday to me." But it wasn't just any Tuesday. Sarah knew the encrypted communication upgrade they were testing today represented millions in development costs. If it worked, it would give F-22 squadrons unprecedented coordination capabilities. If it didn't, well, that's why they tested things over empty wilderness instead of populated areas. The brass wanted a clean run, no glitches, no surprises, just solid data they could take to Congress. Sarah pulled the photograph from her pocket, the one she always carried on flights. Her daughter Emma, 8 years old, caught mid-laugh at her birthday party 2 weeks ago. The gap where her 2 front teeth used to be made her look simultaneously adorable and mischievous. "Mommy flies the fastest plane in the whole world," Emma had announced to her 2nd grade class during career day, her chest puffed with pride. Sarah had stood in that classroom in her dress uniform, fielding questions about missiles and speed and whether she'd ever seen aliens, and she'd thought, "This is why I do it. To show Emma that women can do anything. To be the hero in her daughter's eyes." "That your girl?" Marcus asked, nodding at the photo. "Yeah, Emma. She wants to be an astronaut." "Of course she does. She's got you for a mom." Marcus's voice carried a note of something, not quite sadness but maybe longing. Sarah knew his story. Father was a mechanic who'd worked on B-52s, died in a car accident when Marcus was 15. His mother had raised him alone, working 2 jobs to put him through college. Flying wasn't just his career. It was his tribute to a father who'd loved aircraft but never got to fly them. The operations officer approached with their mission briefing, running through details Sarah had already memorized. They'd fly a standard patrol route over the northern range, staying at 9,000 meters, running communication drills every 15 minutes. Expected flight time, 2 hours. Weather, clear. Threat level, 0. A milk run in military parlance. The kind of mission where the biggest danger was boredom. 20 minutes later, Sarah was strapped into her cockpit, running through her pre-flight checks with the methodical precision of a surgeon. Every switch, every gauge, every system, she verified them all. The F-22 was a marvel of engineering, but it was still a machine, and machines could fail. Her instructors at pilot training had drilled that into her head. Trust your aircraft, but verify everything. "Raptor 17, you are clear for takeoff." The tower controller's voice crackled through her headset. Sarah advanced the throttles, feeling 70,000 pounds of thrust push her back into her seat. The Raptor accelerated down the runway with the eager power of a thoroughbred, and then she was pulling back on the stick, and the ground was falling away, and there was that moment, that perfect, crystalline moment, where she wasn't bound to Earth anymore. She was flying. Marcus's aircraft tucked into formation beside her, 3,000 feet to her east. The sky opened up before them, vast and blue and infinite. Below, the Alaskan wilderness spread out like a rumpled blanket of green and white, mountains cutting jagged lines against the horizon. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, beautiful and deadly. She'd lost friends in these mountains, good pilots who'd made small mistakes that became fatal in an environment that offered no second chances. "Nice morning for it," Marcus transmitted, his voice carrying that slight compression that military radios gave everything. "Best office in the world," Sarah replied, allowing herself a smile. They climbed steadily, the altimeter unwinding. 3,000 meters, 5,000 meters, 7,000 meters. The air thinned, the horizon curved, and the sky deepened from blue to something approaching purple. At 9,000 meters, they leveled off, and Sarah began the first communication drill, her hands moving across the controls with practiced ease. "Com check, Raptor 18, she transmitted to Marcus. 5x5 Raptor 17, system nominal. Sarah glanced down at the wilderness below. They were over one of the most remote areas in Alaska now, a region where the only signs of human presence were the occasional hunting cabin or old mining road. If something went wrong here, help was hours away, but nothing was going to go wrong. The weather was perfect. The aircraft were performing flawlessly. The mission was routine. She thought about Emma again, about the pancakes she'd promised to make for dinner tonight, the special ones with chocolate chips arranged in smiley faces. Emma would sit at the kitchen counter, swinging her legs and talking a mile a minute about her day at school. Normal, safe, perfect. Then, at exactly 9,000 meters, with no warning whatsoever, both of Sarah Chen's Pratt & Whitney F-119 engines stopped. Not a sputter, not a cough, just instant, total silence where two of the most powerful jet engines in the world had been roaring seconds before. Every alarm in Sarah's cockpit erupted simultaneously, a cacophony of warning tones and flashing lights that turned her world into chaos. Her eyes snapped to her instruments, her brain trying to process what couldn't be possible. Complete engine failure. Both engines. Dead. And through her headset she heard Marcus's voice, tight with controlled terror. "Elmendorf Tower, this is Raptor 18. I have complete engine failure. Both engines are gone. I say again, I have lost both engines." Sarah's training kicked in, her hands moving automatically through restart procedures, but somewhere in the back of her mind, a cold voice whispered the truth she didn't want to acknowledge. They were 70 miles from base, at 9,000 meters, with no power, over some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. They were going to fall out of the sky. And there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. Sarah's world narrowed to the instrument panel in front of her, even as her peripheral vision caught the horrifying sight of her altitude bleeding away. The F-22 Raptor, the most sophisticated air superiority fighter ever built, had just become a $70 million glider. Her hands flew across the cockpit controls with the desperate precision of a pianist playing for her life. "Elmendorf Tower, this is Raptor 17. I have complete engine failure, both engines. Attempting restart procedures." Her voice came out level, professional, betraying none of the ice water flooding through her veins. 12 years of training had prepared her for this moment, but training and reality were two very different things when you were actually falling toward jagged mountains with nothing but physics between you and death. The restart checklist burned in her mind. Throttle to idle, check fuel flow, verify ignition systems, advance throttle. Her fingers moved through the sequence with mechanical efficiency, but the engines remained dead, silent as tombstones. The twin Pratt & Whitney F-119 engines that could push her aircraft past Mach 2 might as well have been paperweights now. 8,500 meters. The altimeter was unwinding like a countdown clock. Through her canopy, Sarah could see Marcus's Raptor 3,000 feet away, and her stomach clenched. His aircraft was in a slight spin, the nose dropping too fast. He was panicking, overcorrecting. At this rate, he'd lose control completely before they dropped below 5,000 meters. "Webb, Marcus, listen to me." Sarah's command voice cut through the radio traffic. "Level your wings, you're spinning. Control your descent rate." "I can't, Sarah, the systems aren't responding. I've got nothing." His voice had climbed an octave, the professional veneer cracking. "You have flight controls. You have your stick and rudder. Fly the damn aircraft, Lieutenant." The sharpness in her tone was calculated. Panic was contagious, and if Marcus lost it completely, he'd auger into the mountainside long before ejection became an option. 8,000 meters. Sarah's own hands were steady on the controls, but her mind was racing through calculations that kept coming up wrong. At their current glide ratio, they had maybe 20 minutes of controlled flight left. The nearest suitable landing area was Fairbanks International, 73 miles southeast. They couldn't make it, not even close. The emergency landing zones marked on her charts were all too far, and the terrain below offered nothing but death. Forests that would shred an aircraft like paper, mountains that would crush it like an aluminum can, or if they were really unlucky, one of the countless glacial crevasses that would swallow them whole. "Tower, Raptor 17, I need vectors to nearest emergency landing area." She already knew the answer, but procedure demanded she ask. The response from Elmendorf came back, and she could hear the strain in the controller's voice. "Raptor 17, nearest suitable landing area is Eielson Air Force Base, bearing 095, distance 68 miles. Be advised, at your current rate of descent and glide ratio, you will not reach Eielson." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The controller didn't say what they both knew. She and Marcus needed to prepare for ejection. But ejection at 8,000 meters in Alaskan wilderness in January was only marginally better than riding the aircraft in. The survival rate was maybe 50-50, and that was if rescue could reach them before hypothermia set in. And if they landed wrong, if the chutes failed, if they hit trees on the way down. 7,500 meters. "Sarah," Marcus's voice was steadier now, responding to her earlier command. "I've got my glide stabilized, but I ran the numbers. We're not going to make it anywhere." "I know," 2 words that tasted like ashes. She tried the engine restart sequence again. Nothing. It made no sense. Dual engine failure in flight was so statistically improbable that it wasn't even seriously covered in training scenarios. One engine, yes, that happened occasionally, and the F-22 could fly and even fight on a single engine. But both, simultaneously, in 2 separate aircraft. The coincidence was so unlikely that Sarah's analytical mind immediately jumped to sabotage. Had something happened during pre-flight? Had someone tampered with fuel systems? But that was impossible. Security at Elmendorf was ironclad, and she'd personally verified every system during her walk-around. 7,000 meters. The mountains were getting close enough that she could make out individual trees now, their shadows long in the morning sun. "Raptor 17, Raptor 18, be advised rescue helicopters are launching from Elmendorf. Estimated time to your position is 45 minutes. The tower controller's voice was professional, but Sarah could read between the lines. 45 minutes wouldn't matter if they'd already punched out and were scattered across 50 square miles of wilderness. Sarah's thoughts flashed to Emma. Her daughter would be at school right now, probably in math class, chewing on her pencil the way she always did when she was concentrating. Emma wouldn't know anything was wrong until the chaplain and the notification officer showed up at their house. Sarah's mother would pick Emma up from school, and there would be that horrible moment when her 8-year-old daughter realized that Mommy wasn't coming home, that Mommy had fallen out of the sky over Alaska and... No, Sarah slammed the thought away. She wasn't dead yet. She was still flying, still in control, and she hadn't survived 12 years of military aviation by giving up. She scanned her instruments again, looking for anything, any clue, any system that might give her an edge. The fuel gauges read normal, hydraulics were good, flight controls responsive, It was just the engines, dead, silent, gone. 6,500 meters. Sarah, I need to know. Marcus's voice was quiet now, resigned. Do we eject? It was the question she'd been avoiding. By the book, they should have already ejected. Every second they stayed with the aircraft decreased their odds of a successful ejection. But Sarah's instincts were screaming at her that there had to be another way. There had to be. The radio erupted with static so loud and sudden that Sarah flinched. White noise flooded her headset, overwhelming every frequency. She reached for the volume control, but before she could adjust it, the static cleared, and a voice came through. A child's voice. Young, male, maybe 12 or 13 years old, speaking with absolute clarity on a frequency that should have been encrypted, secure, impossible for anyone outside the military to access. Dragonfly 6, do you copy? Dragonfly 6, I can help you. Sarah's hand froze on the throttle. Dragonfly 6. That call sign, she hadn't heard it in 5 years. Not since she'd volunteered with the youth aviation program in Fairbanks, teaching underprivileged kids about flight. The kids had been allowed to give her a call sign, and one boy in particular, a quiet kid with sad eyes, had chosen Dragonfly 6 because his mother had told him dragonflies were symbols of good luck and transformation. Tommy Reeves, the kid whose father had died in an aircraft accident before he was born, the kid she'd mentored for 6 months before his mother had moved them to Seattle for a fresh start. But that was impossible. Tommy would be 15 now, maybe 16. And he'd be in Seattle, not here in the Alaskan wilderness, and he definitely wouldn't be on a secure military frequency. 6,000 meters, 15 minutes, maybe less. Who is this? Sarah demanded, her voice sharp with confusion and disbelief. How are you on this frequency? Identify yourself. Captain Chen, it's Tommy Reeves. I know this doesn't make sense, and I know you don't have time for explanations, but you need to trust me right now. You and Lieutenant Webb need to change your heading to 270 degrees. There's a place you can land. Marcus's voice cut through, high and strained. Sarah, are you hearing this? Who the hell is on our frequency? The tower controller's voice was distant now, garbled by the mountains. Raptor 17, cannot confirm transmission. They were on their own, 70 miles from base, falling toward the unforgiving wilderness, with a child's voice on an impossible frequency telling her to fly toward coordinates that showed nothing but forest and rock. Sarah stared at her navigation display. Heading 270 would take them deeper into the mountains, further from any known emergency landing zone, away from any possible help. It would kill them. Unless it saved them. Sarah, Marcus shouted, we need to eject, now we're running out of time. 5,800 meters. Sarah's hand hovered over the stick. One decision. Life or death. Trust protocol and punch out, hope for the best, leave Emma to grow up without a mother. Or trust an impossible voice, a ghost from her past, a child who shouldn't exist on this frequency. She thought of Tommy Reeves, sitting in that community center 5 years ago, his eyes lighting up when she'd explained how wings generated lift. She thought of the quiet determination in his face when he'd told her, my dad loved planes, but he never got to fly one. I'm going to fly for both of us. The voice on the radio was older, but the cadence was the same. And Sarah Chen had always trusted her instincts. Webb, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Change heading to 270, that's an order. You've lost your mind. Marcus's voice cracked through the radio, disbelief turning to anger. That heading takes us deeper into the range. There's nothing out there but rock and ice. Sarah ignored him, banking her powerless Raptor toward the new heading. The aircraft responded sluggishly without engine thrust, every maneuver bleeding precious altitude. Her eyes tracked the navigation display where the new course line appeared, a vector pointing straight into the heart of the northern Chugach Range. into territory so remote that even the satellite imagery looked fuzzy and outdated. 5,500 meters. 14 minutes her mind calculated automatically, maybe less. Tower, Raptor 17 is changing course to heading 270. Sarah transmitted, knowing the response would be immediate and furious. It was. Negative, Raptor 17. That heading takes you away from all emergency landing zones. Recommend you maintain course for Eielson or prepare for immediate ejection. Copy Tower, continuing on 270. Sarah's voice was steel. Through her canopy, she saw Marcus's Raptor hesitate, wobbling in the air as he fought with the decision. Then, with visible reluctance, his aircraft banked to follow her. This is insane, Captain. You know that, right? We're following a voice that shouldn't exist toward nothing. I know what I'm doing, Lieutenant. But did she? Sarah's rational mind was screaming at her that this was suicide. Every instrument, every chart, every piece of training told her to eject now while she still could. But something deeper, instinct honed by 12 years of impossible decisions, of trusting her gut when the computers said otherwise, told her that Tommy Reeves was real and he was trying to save them. The child's voice came back, steady and clear despite the impossible circumstances. Dragonfly 6, your heading is good. At 4,800 meters, you'll need to adjust to 265 to enter the valley approach. The opening is narrow, maybe 300 meters across. You'll need to be precise. Sarah's hands tightened on the stick. 300 meters was nothing. At their current descent rate, they'd be threading that needle at over 400 kilometers per hour with no margin for error. Hit the valley walls and they'd vaporize instantly. Tommy, Sarah forced her voice to stay calm. I need you to tell me exactly where you are and how you're on this frequency. A pause. When Tommy spoke again, she could hear the pain in his voice. I'm in trouble, Captain. I was hiking with my scout troop in the Nick River area and I fell. I'm hurt pretty bad. I found this old bunker with radio equipment and I've been trying to reach anyone for hours. When I heard your distress call, I recognized your voice. I remembered the call sign I gave you. 5,000 meters. Marcus cut in, his tone desperate. Kid, I don't know who you are or how you're doing this, but we need more than faith here. What do you see? What's at those coordinates? An old runway. My dad, before he died, he told my mom about this place. He said it was a secret Cold War facility, built back when they thought the Russians might come over the pole. It's hidden in a valley, surrounded by peaks. That's why it's not on your charts. They erased it from the records when they shut it down. Sarah's mind raced. She'd heard rumors of ghost bases scattered across Alaska, emergency facilities from the 1950s and 60s, built during the height of Cold War paranoia, and then abandoned when the threat never materialized. Most were myths, but some were real. How do you know it's still there? Sarah demanded. How do you know it's not just overgrown forest by now? Because my dad left me a photo. It's dated 15 years ago and he's standing on the runway next to an F-22. He was stationed there for some kind of testing program. He wrote on the back, Dragonfly Field saved my life once. Maybe it'll save yours. Sarah felt her breath catch. David Reeves had been a crew chief, a mechanic who'd worked on everything from cargo planes to fighters. She'd learned that when she'd mentored Tommy. The boy had carried his father's legacy like a weight, desperate to honor a man he'd never known. 4,500 meters, 10 minutes. Sarah, this is insane. Marcus's voice had dropped to something between pleading and resignation. We're betting our lives on a ghost story from a kid who fell into a hole. You have a better idea, Sarah shot back, because I'm all ears, Webb. Silence. They both knew the math. Ejection was looking worse by the second. At their current altitude, they'd have maybe 30 seconds from pulling the handles to hitting the ground. In this terrain, the chances of landing somewhere survivable were minimal. Even if they did survive the ejection, they'd be scattered across miles of wilderness in sub-zero temperatures. The rescue helicopters would find their bodies in the spring thaw. Tommy, I need details. Sarah was already committed to this course, but she needed more information. Wind speed and direction. What do you see from your position? Northwest wind at about 15 knots, gusting higher. The valley runs north-south, so you'll have a crosswind on approach. The runway, his voice caught, and Sarah heard him take a sharp breath. Pain. The kid was hurt worse than he was letting on. The runway is maybe 1,500 meters long. The north end has some debris, fallen trees. You'll want to approach from the south. 1,500 meters. Sarah ran the numbers in her head. The F-22 needed about 900 meters to land under normal conditions with full braking and drag chute. Without engines for reverse thrust, without knowing the runway condition, she'd need every centimeter of that 1,500 meters, and then some. How can you see the runway from where you are? Marcus asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. I can't, not directly, but I found my dad's notes in the bunker. He documented everything, approach angles, wind patterns, hazards. It's like he knew someone might need this information someday. 4,000 meters. Sarah saw it then, a gap in the mountain wall ahead, exactly where Tommy said it would be. A dark slash in the granite face that could be a valley entrance or could be just another shadow. At their speed and descent rate, she'd know which in about 90 seconds. I see something, she transmitted. Possible valley entrance bearing 268. That's it, Tommy's voice surged with hope. That's the entrance. Captain, when you commit to the turn, commit fully. Don't try to correct if you think you're too close to the walls. The valley widens after the entrance, but the first 100 meters are the tightest. Sarah's mouth went dry. He was describing a maneuver that belonged in a canyon run training exercise, not something you attempted in a powerless aircraft with one chance to get it right. But she'd flown canyon runs. She'd threaded her Raptor through mountain passes at Mach 1.5, trusting her instruments and her instincts. This was just slower, and with infinitely higher stakes. 3,500 meters, 8 minutes. Webb, stay on my 6. When I commit to the valley, you follow exactly. No deviations. Copy? Marcus's voice was tight. Sarah, if we die doing this, I'm going to be really pissed at you. Despite everything, Sarah felt a grim smile touch her lips. If we die doing this, Lieutenant, I promise you can file a formal complaint. The valley entrance was growing larger now, and Sarah could see the sheer rock walls on either side. Tommy was right. The gap was maybe 300 meters across, probably less. At their current wingspan of 13 meters, they'd have room to spare in theory. In practice, with crosswinds and unpowered flight, it was going to be like threading a needle while falling off a building. Tommy, I need you to talk me through the approach. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls, but her heart was hammering hard enough to hurt. Everything your dad's notes said. Don't leave anything out. Okay. The boy's voice steadied, taking on an almost clinical tone that reminded Sarah eerily of a tower controller. Valley entrance at your 12 o'clock, range 2 kilometers. Entry heading should be 266 to account for crosswind. Once you're through the entrance, immediate left bank to 240 to follow the valley floor. The valley descends at about 15 degrees for the first kilometer, then levels out. The runway will be visible on your left after you clear the second bend. Sarah absorbed the information, building a mental picture of terrain she couldn't yet see. Flying blind into a hidden valley based on notes from a dead man, guided by his son who was trapped somewhere in the wilderness. The absurdity of it would have been laughable if her life, and Marcus's life, didn't depend on it. 3,000 meters, 6 minutes. Captain Chen, Tommy's voice came back, quieter now, younger. The professional veneer cracking to reveal the scared teenager underneath. I'm sorry I got you into this. When I heard your distress call, I thought maybe I could help, like you helped me, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's nothing there anymore and I'm just... Tommy, Sarah cut him off, her voice firm but gentle. You listened to me. You did exactly the right thing. You gave us a chance when we had none. Whatever happens in the next few minutes, you remember that. You're brave and your father would be proud of you." A sound that might have been a sob or might have been static came through the radio. Sarah adjusted her heading to 266, the valley entrance now filling her canopy. The rock walls looked close enough to touch, ancient stone that had stood for millions of years and wouldn't even notice when two fighter jets smashed into it. Behind her, Marcus's voice was barely a whisper, "God help us." The valley swallowed them whole. The rock walls of the valley entrance screamed past Sarah's canopy, so close she could see individual striations in the granite. Her entire world compressed into a narrow tunnel of stone and sky, every muscle in her body coiled tight as she fought to keep the raptor centered in the impossible gap. The crosswind hit them the moment they entered, slamming the aircraft sideways with brutal force. Sarah corrected instinctively, her hands moving with the practiced economy of thousands of flight hours. But without engine power, every correction cost her energy she couldn't afford to lose. The stick felt mushy, sluggish, the control surfaces barely biting into the thin air. "Too close. Sarah, we're too close." Marcus's voice cracked with panic as his raptor's right wing passed within meters of the valley wall. "Hold your line, Webb. Don't overcorrect." Sarah's voice cut through his fear like a scalpel. She could see his aircraft wobbling in her peripheral vision, dangerously close to a fatal oscillation. If Marcus panicked now and jerked the controls, he'd clip the wall and cartwheel into oblivion, probably taking Sarah with him in the explosion. 2,800 meters, 5 minutes, maybe less. The valley entrance seemed to last forever and no time at all. Then suddenly they were through, the walls falling back, and Sarah could breathe again. For exactly 2 seconds. "Left bank to 240 now." Tommy's voice came through urgent and clear. Sarah rolled left, feeling the raptor respond with agonizing slowness. The valley floor was rushing up at them, a river of ice and rock that looked like a highway to hell. The 15-degree descent Tommy had mentioned felt more like a cliff face from her cockpit. And then she saw it. The valley walls bore scars. Long, straight gouges in the stone where vehicles had once carved a road. The remnants of what might have been support structures, now just twisted metal skeletons clinging to the mountainside. This place had been real. People had lived here, worked here, built an entire facility in this hidden valley where Soviet spy satellites would never find it. Which meant Tommy was right about the runway. Which meant Sarah had made the right call. Or they were about to die believing a comforting lie. 2,400 meters. "Second bend coming up in 30 seconds, Tommy called out. "Adjust heading to 235. The runway will be on your left, running north-south. Surface condition unknown, but my dad's notes say it was reinforced concrete rated for heavy bombers." Sarah's eyes scanned ahead, looking for the bend. The valley twisted right, and she guided her aircraft through the turn, Marcus following like a shadow. They were committed now. There was no pulling up, no going around. They would either find a runway in the next minute or they would become debris scattered across a forgotten Cold War ghost base. The bend opened up, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There it was. A runway exactly where Tommy said it would be, cutting through the valley floor like a scar. 15 years of neglect showed in every meter, cracks spiderwebbed across the concrete, vegetation pushed up through the gaps, and the northern end was partially blocked by fallen trees and what looked like collapsed hangar debris. But it was there. Real, solid, possible. "I see it, Marcus, do you see it?" "Jesus Christ, it's actually there." Marcus's voice was equal parts disbelief and desperate hope. "But Sarah, look at the condition. We'll tear the landing gear right off." He wasn't wrong. The runway looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since the Cold War ended, but Sarah was already running calculations. They had maybe 1,200 meters of usable runway, accounting for the debris at the north end. Their approach speed would be around 250 kilometers per hour without thrust reversers. It would be tight, dangerously tight. 2,000 meters, 3 minutes. Tommy, what about approach obstructions? Any trees, towers, anything that could catch us on final? The southern approach is clear. My dad's notes mention they kept it that way specifically for emergency landings. But Captain, Tommy's voice wavered. The crosswind, it's getting stronger. I can hear it from down here. As if to punctuate his words, a gust slammed into Sarah's aircraft, rolling her 10 degrees before she could correct. The Raptor's stick shook in her hands, the airplane fighting her for control. Landing in a crosswind without engine power was textbook impossible. It required precise thrust management to keep the aircraft aligned, and Sarah had no thrust to manage. "Gear down," she announced, making the decision. The landing gear dropped with a reassuring thunk, the wheels locking into place. Immediate drag pulled at the aircraft, slowing them, which was good, but also making the Raptor even more susceptible to the crosswind, which was bad. Marcus followed suit. "Gear down and locked. Sarah, I don't know if I can do this. The wind is all over the place." "You can do this." Sarah's voice was firm, projecting a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "You're going to follow me in. Match my approach angle, don't try to be a hero. If you have to go around, you punch out immediately. Understood?" "Go around with what engines?" Marcus laughed, a brittle sound that bordered on hysteria. "We get one shot at this." 1,500 meters. Sarah lined up her approach, the runway growing larger in her windscreen. From here, the damage looked even worse. Massive cracks, chunks of concrete missing, entire sections that looked ready to crumble under the weight of a bicycle, much less a 19,000-kilogram fighter jet. "Final approach," Sarah transmitted. "Tower, Raptor 17 is committed to landing at—" She paused, realizing she didn't even know what to call this place. "Uncharted facility, coordinates transmitted." The tower's response was garbled, barely intelligible through the mountain interference. "Copy, emergency, converging position." They were on their own. "Tommy, I need winds." "Northwest at 20 knots, gusting to 25. The boy's voice was tight with pain and fear. "Captain, you need to crab into the wind about 15 degrees. When you're over the threshold, kick out straight and pray the gear holds." Sarah had done crosswind landings 100 times, but never without engines. Never on a runway that looked like a war zone. Never with another pilot depending on her to show them the way. 1,000 meters, 90 seconds. She adjusted her approach angle, crabbing the aircraft into the wind. The Raptor flew sideways relative to the runway, nose pointed 15 degrees off centerline. It felt wrong, looked wrong, violated every instinct that said you land an airplane pointed where you want to go. But Tommy was right. It was the only way to maintain the glide path against the crosswind. The runway threshold rushed up. Sarah could see individual weeds growing through the cracks now, debris scattered across the surface. A section of concrete about halfway down that looked like it had collapsed into some kind of sinkhole. 50 meters, she called out, more to herself than anyone else. 40, 30. The stall warning shrieked. She was too slow, too low, and the wind was trying to flip her onto her back. Sarah kicked the rudder hard, straightening the nose, feeling the aircraft drop the last few meters like a stone. The main landing gear hit concrete with a bang that rattled her teeth. The aircraft bounced bad, she was coming back down hard, and Sarah fought the instinct to pull back on the stick. No power meant no go-around. She had to ride it out. The second impact was even harder. Something in the landing gear assembly made a sound like a gunshot, and Sarah prayed it was just stressed metal and not a critical failure. The nose gear slammed down, and she was on the runway, rolling, the brakes screaming as she stood on them with everything she had. The runway was worse than it looked. Each crack jolted the aircraft violently. The collapsed section rushed toward her, and Sarah had a moment of pure terror that she'd drop right through it, but the Raptor's weight distributed enough that she rolled across, the concrete groaning but holding. 800 meters of runway left. 600, 400. The brakes were smoking, the tires screaming. Sarah could smell burning rubber even through her oxygen mask. The fallen trees at the north end of the runway were getting bigger, closer, individual branches visible now. 200 meters, 100. The Raptor shuddered to a stop with maybe 30 meters to spare. Sarah sat in her cockpit, hands still gripping the stick, her entire body shaking with adrenaline. She was alive. She was on the ground. She had done the impossible. Behind her, Marcus's Raptor appeared through the morning haze, crabbed into the wind exactly as Sarah had been. She watched him make the same corrections, the same last-second straightening, the same violent touchdown. His aircraft bounced 3 times, each impact looking like it might tear the landing gear clean off. But he stayed with it, braking hard, and rolled to a stop about 200 meters behind Sarah. For a long moment, the radio was silent except for the sound of 2 pilots breathing hard. Then Marcus's voice came through, shaky but alive. "I am never ever flying with you again, Captain." Sarah let out a breath that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. "Tommy, Tommy, are you there?" Static then. "I'm here, you did it, you actually did it." "We did it," Sarah corrected, her voice thick with emotion. "Tommy, you saved our lives. Now we're going to return the favor. Give me your exact location." As Tommy started reading off coordinates, Sarah popped her canopy and climbed out onto the wing of her Raptor. The cold Alaskan air hit her like a physical force, but she barely felt it. She was standing on a runway that didn't exist, in a valley that wasn't on any map, alive because a boy she'd taught about flying 5 years ago had remembered a call sign and his father's last gift. Marcus climbed out of his cockpit, his legs visibly shaking as he dropped to the cracked concrete and just sat there, head in his hands. Sarah looked around at the abandoned facility, at the buildings barely visible through overgrown vegetation, and wondered what other secrets this place held. And somewhere in the wilderness, Tommy Reeves waited for rescue, hurt and alone but alive. They all were. For now, Sarah's boots hit the cracked concrete with a solid thud, her legs wobbling slightly from the adrenaline crash. Behind her, Marcus had finally pulled himself together and was standing, though he looked like he'd aged a decade in the last 20 minutes. The morning sun was climbing higher now, casting long shadows across the abandoned runway and illuminating a facility that time had tried hard to erase. "This place is real," Marcus breathed, turning slowly to take in their surroundings. "I can't believe it's actually real." The valley was larger than it had seemed from the air, maybe 2 kilometers long and half a kilometer wide at its widest point. The runway occupied the flattest section, but surrounding it were the skeletal remains of what had once been a fully operational military installation. Rusted Quonset huts sagged into the earth, their corrugated metal sides streaked with decades of weather. What looked like fuel storage tanks lay on their sides, empty and forgotten. And at the far end of the runway, partially hidden by spruce trees that had grown wild and unchecked, stood a 2-story concrete building that might have been the command center. "Tommy, we're on the ground and secure." Sarah keyed her radio, her breath misting in the cold air. "What's your status?" The response came back weaker than before, and Sarah's chest tightened. "I'm okay. Cold. My leg really hurts. Captain, I'm in a crevasse about 5 miles northwest of your position. I can see daylight above me, but I can't climb out. The walls are too slick with ice." 5 miles through Alaskan wilderness. Sarah pulled out her survival kit from the Raptor's equipment bay, mentally inventorying what they had. Rope, first aid supplies, emergency rations, flares, a couple of thermal blankets, enough to mount a rescue if they moved fast. "We're coming for you, Tommy, but first I need to understand something." Sarah started walking toward the main building, Marcus falling in beside her. "How did you access this radio equipment? Where exactly are you?" "There's a bunker. I fell through some old boards covering an access shaft. The radio room is down here. It still has power somehow, maybe solar or geothermal. The equipment is ancient, but when I turned it on, I could hear everything. Military frequencies, civilian, everything. It was like the whole electromagnetic spectrum just opened up. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. Cold War-era facilities sometimes had incredibly robust power systems, designed to operate independently for months or even years. If this place had geothermal power tapped into volcanic activity, and Alaska had plenty of that, it could theoretically still be running after decades of abandonment. The main building's door hung askew on broken hinges. Sarah pushed it open carefully, mindful of structural instability. The interior was dark, lit only by shafts of sunlight streaming through broken windows. Dust motes danced in the beams, and the smell of decay and mildew was overwhelming. "Watch your step," Marcus warned, his boot crunching on broken glass. They moved through what had been a lobby area, past overturned furniture and filing cabinets with their drawers hanging open like broken jaws. Papers littered the floor, their text faded to illegibility. Sarah picked one up, a requisition form dated 1989. Whatever had happened here, the facility had been operational right up until the end of the Cold War. A corridor led deeper into the building. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her survival knife, though she didn't know what threat she expected to find in a facility that had been abandoned for 3 decades. The doors along the corridor stood open, revealing offices and storage rooms long since looted or left to rot. Then they found the communications room. It was at the end of the corridor, a large space that must have been the nerve center of the entire facility. Banks of equipment lined the walls, teletype machines, radar consoles, radio transceivers that belonged in a museum. And in the center of it all, a desk with a chair that looked like someone had just stepped away for a coffee break. "Look at this," Marcus breathed, running his hand over a console. "This is pre-digital stuff, vacuum tubes and mechanical switches. How is any of this still functional?" Sarah was staring at the wall above the main console. A bulletin board hung there, and pinned to it were photographs, yellowed with age but still clear enough to see. Most showed personnel standing in groups, smiling at the camera in that forced way military photos always looked. But one photo stopped Sarah cold. It showed a young man in Air Force utilities standing beside an F-22 Raptor, right here on this very runway. The aircraft gleamed in the sunlight, and the man's face was proud and happy. The name tape on his uniform read REVS. Sarah stepped closer, her hand trembling as she unpinned the photograph. On the back, someone had written in neat handwriting, "David Reeves, Final Test Flight, Dragonfly Field, June 15, 2010. "Tommy's father," Sarah whispered. "He was here. He flew F-22s from this runway." Marcus was examining other photos. This wasn't just an abandoned facility. This was an active test site. "Look, here's another shot with what looks like stealth coating experiments, and this one shows some kind of engine testing." Sarah's radio crackled. "Captain Chen." It was Elmendorf Tower, signal finally breaking through the mountain interference. "We have your position. Be advised, we're also tracking an emergency locator beacon approximately 5 miles northwest of your location. Civilian emergency services have been notified. Search and rescue ETA is 45 minutes. Tower, be advised we have contact with the beacon source. It's a teenage boy, injured, trapped in a crevasse. We're going to attempt rescue before SAR arrival." "Negative, Raptor 17. You are ordered to remain with your aircraft until rescue arrives." Sarah looked at Marcus, then at the photo of David Reeves in her hand. "Tower, that's not going to happen. The boy saved our lives. We're not leaving him out there. Raptor 17 out." She switched frequencies before the tower could respond. "Tommy, we found your dad's photo. He was stationed here, wasn't he?" "Yeah." Tommy's voice was fatting, getting weaker. "He loved this place. My mom said he called it Dragonfly Field because of all the dragonflies that would come to the valley in summer. He said it was the most beautiful place he'd ever seen, even if it was a secret he could never tell anyone about. Sarah felt her throat tighten. David Reeves had died before his son was born, but he'd left behind clues, breadcrumbs across the years that had somehow led to this moment. The photo with coordinates on the back. The stories told to his wife that she'd passed to their son. The call sign that had bridged 5 years and impossible odds. "We're coming for you, Tommy, I promise." But as Sarah turned to leave the communications room, something else caught her eye. A logbook, sitting on the desk, open to one of the last entries. The handwriting was the same as on the back of the photo, David Reeves's handwriting. She picked it up, scanning the entry dated June 20, 2010, 5 days before David Reeves died in what the official report had called a training accident. Final entry. They're shutting down Dragonfly Field next week. All records to be expunged, all evidence of our work here to be destroyed. It breaks my heart. This place saved my life when I had engine failure on approach 2 years ago. The valley walls protected me from the worst of the wind, and this runway, this beautiful, impossible runway, gave me a place to land when I had nowhere else to go. I'm leaving this logbook hidden. Maybe someday someone will need what we built here. Maybe my son will find it if anything happens to me. Tommy, if you're reading this, remember, dragonflies can fly in any direction, forward, backward, up, down. They're survivors. Be like a dragonfly. And remember, Dragonfly Field will always be here, waiting to save someone else the way it saved me. Sarah's hands were shaking as she closed the logbook. David Reeves had known. Somehow, he'd known that this place would matter again, that the secrets buried here might save lives in the future. And his son had made that prophecy come true. "Sarah, we need to move." Marcus was at the door, survival gear already packed and ready. If that kid's been down there for hours, he's running out of time. Sarah tucked the logbook into her flight suit pocket along with the photograph. "Let's go get him." They left the abandoned building and headed northwest, into the wilderness, following coordinates given to them by a boy who'd been guided by a father he'd never known. The rescue was on. But as they pushed into the dense forest, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this story was far from over, that Dragonfly Field still had more secrets to reveal. Behind them, their 2 raptors sat silent on the broken runway, monuments to impossible survival in a place that didn't officially exist. The forest was denser than Sarah had anticipated, the spruce trees packed so tightly that even the midday sun barely penetrated to the forest floor. She and Marcus moved as quickly as the terrain allowed, pushing through underbrush that grabbed at their flight suits, stepping over fallen logs slick with moss and ice. The GPS coordinates Tommy had given them pulsed on Sarah's wrist-mounted survival unit, a digital beacon guiding them through the wilderness. 2 miles down, 3 to go, Marcus panted, his breath coming in clouds. Neither of them was dressed for a wilderness hike. Flight suits were designed for cockpit emergencies, not Arctic trekking, but they pushed on regardless. Sarah keyed her radio. "Tommy, still with me?" The response was slower this time, the voice weaker. "Still here, Captain. Getting pretty cold, though." "Talk to me. Keep talking. Tell me about the bunker you found." A pause, then Tommy's voice came back, stronger as he focused on the question. "I was hiking with my troop. We were doing a wilderness survival exercise. I wandered off the trail, I know, stupid, and I fell through these old boards. They were covering a shaft maybe 4 meters deep. When I hit bottom, I was in this corridor. Concrete walls, metal doors, everything covered in dust." Sarah vaulted over a stream, Marcus right behind her, and the radio equipment. One of the doors was open. Inside was this room just packed with old radios and communications gear. Most of it was dead, but there was this one console with lights still on, green LEDs really dim. I turned some dials and suddenly I could hear voices. Lots of them. Emergency frequencies, civilian channels, everything. It was like the whole world was talking at once. Sarah's mind worked through the implications. Cold War facilities often had incredibly sophisticated monitoring equipment, designed to intercept and decode enemy transmissions. If the power was still running and the equipment still functional, Tommy had essentially stumbled into a decades-old listening post that could still tap into the electromagnetic spectrum. "Then I heard your voice," Tommy continued. "You and Lieutenant Webb talking about engine failure. I recognized you immediately, your voice, the way you talk, and I thought maybe I could help. So I found the transmission controls and I used the call sign, hoping you'd remember." "How did you know about Dragonfly Field?" Sarah asked, ducking under a low-hanging branch. "The coordinates were written on the back of my dad's photo. My mom gave it to me for my 15th birthday last month. She said Dad had left it for me with instructions to give it to me when I was old enough to understand. On the back he wrote, 'Tommy, if you ever need saving, remember Dragonfly Field.' And then the coordinates. I didn't know what it meant until I fell into that bunker and found a map on the wall showing this valley." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. David Reeves had left his son a gift that spanned death itself, knowledge that would one day save not just Tommy's life, but Sarah's and Marcus's as well. The symmetry of it was almost unbearable. "1 mile," Marcus called out. "Sarah, look." Ahead, the forest opened into a clearing, and in the center of that clearing, the ground dropped away into a jagged tear in the earth, a glacial crevasse, maybe 5 meters wide and impossibly deep. Sarah approached carefully, dropping to her belly at the edge and looking down. The crevasse was a slash of darkness and ice, the walls gleaming blue-white where the sun penetrated. And far below, maybe 15 meters down, she could see a small figure huddled against the ice wall. "Tommy," Sarah's voice echoed off the frozen walls. The figure stirred, looking up. A teenage boy, his face pale and drawn with cold and pain, wearing a scout uniform that was torn and dirty. His left leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and even from this distance, Sarah could see he was shivering violently. "Captain Chen," Tommy's voice drifted up, and Sarah's radio crackled simultaneously with the same words. He was so close now that she could hear him both directly and through the ancient radio equipment still transmitting from wherever he'd left it. "We're here, Tommy. We're going to get you out." Sarah was already pulling rope from her pack, her training taking over. Marcus found a sturdy tree about 3 meters from the crevasse edge and began rigging an anchor point. "Sarah," Tommy called up, and there was something different in his voice now. Not just pain and cold, but urgency. "Before you come down, there's something you need to know." Sarah paused in her rope rigging. "What is it?" "The bunker, the radio room. There are other things down there. Documents, files, stuff about the program my dad was working on, about why Dragonfly Field was really built." Marcus shot Sarah a look. "What kind of program?" Tommy's voice was fatting again, exhaustion pulling him under. "Advanced propulsion research. They were testing new engine designs here, away from prying eyes. My dad's notes said they had problems, catastrophic failures during high-altitude tests, dual-engine shutdown events that shouldn't have been possible." Sarah's blood went cold. "Dual-engine failures, like what happened to us?" "Yeah," Tommy whispered. "Captain, I don't think what happened to you today was an accident. I think it was the same thing that happened to test pilots here 30 years ago. Whatever they were testing, whatever caused those failures, it's still out there, still active." The implications crashed over Sarah like a wave. If Tommy was right, if there was something in this valley or this region that could cause catastrophic engine failures in F-22s, then this wasn't over. Other pilots would come through here. Other aircraft would fall from the sky unless someone figured out what was happening and why. But right now, none of that mattered as much as the boy dying of hypothermia at the bottom of a crevasse. "We'll worry about that later," Sarah said firmly, finishing her rope rigging. Right now, we're getting you out of there. Marcus, you anchor, I'm going down. Sarah clipped into the rope, checked her harness twice, then backed toward the edge of the crevasse. The ice was slippery, treacherous. One wrong move and she'd fall, and Marcus wouldn't be able to hold both their weights. "On belay," Marcus called out, bracing himself against the anchor tree. "Climbing," Sarah responded and stepped backward over the edge. The descent was terrifying. The crevasse walls were slick ice, offering no handholds, no way to control her descent except through the rope. She spun slowly as she dropped, the blue ice walls reflecting strange, distorted images of herself. The temperature plummeted with each meter, her breath forming instant ice crystals in the air. 15 meters felt like 100. But finally, her boots touched the bottom of the crevasse, and she was face to face with Tommy Reeves. The boy looked worse up close. His lips were blue, his skin waxy and pale. His eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated. Advanced hypothermia. Sarah had seen it before in survival training. Tommy had maybe an hour left, probably less. "Hey there, Dragonfly 7, Sarah said softly, kneeling beside him. "Fancy meeting you here." Tommy managed a weak smile. "Sorry about the accommodations, Captain." Sarah pulled out her thermal blanket, wrapping it around Tommy's shoulders. She did a quick assessment of his injuries. The broken leg was bad, compound fracture from the looks of it, but the hypothermia was the immediate threat. "I'm going to get you in a harness and we're going to pull you up. It's going to hurt. A lot." "I know." Tommy's hand gripped her arm with surprising strength. "Captain, promise me something." "Anything." "Promise you'll look at those files. Promise you'll figure out what's happening here. My dad died because of whatever this program was. I don't want anyone else to die." Sarah looked into the boy's eyes, David Reeves's eyes, she realized now, the same intensity and determination, and nodded. "I promise." She rigged Tommy into a rescue harness, trying to be gentle, but knowing every movement was agony for the kid. To his credit, Tommy barely made a sound beyond a few sharp intakes of breath. "Marcus ready to haul," Sarah called up. The rope went taut, and slowly, agonizingly, Tommy began to rise. Sarah guided him away from the ice walls, protecting his injured leg as best she could. The boy's face was white with pain, but he stayed conscious, stayed focused. It took 10 minutes to get Tommy to the surface. 10 minutes that felt like hours. But finally, Marcus was pulling him over the edge, and Sarah was climbing up behind them. When she reached the surface, Marcus had already immobilized Tommy's leg with supplies from the first aid kit, and was wrapping him in every thermal layer they had. "SAR is 5 minutes out," Marcus reported. "I can hear the helicopter." Sarah knelt beside Tommy, checking his pulse. Thready, weak but steady. "You're going to be okay. You hear me? You're going to be fine." Tommy's eyes found hers. "The bunker, the files, remember." "I remember." The sound of rotor blades filled the air as the rescue helicopter appeared over the trees, descending into the clearing like a mechanical angel. Paramedics spilled out before it even fully landed, and then Tommy was being loaded onto a stretcher, wrapped in heating blankets, an IV already going into his arm. As they lifted him into the helicopter, Tommy raised one hand in a weak salute. Sarah returned it, her throat too tight for words. And then the helicopter was gone, disappearing over the mountains, taking Tommy to safety. Sarah and Marcus stood alone in the clearing, the sound of the rotors fading into silence. "So," Marcus said finally, "we going back to look at those files?" Sarah pulled out David Reeves's logbook from her flight suit pocket, feeling its weight. "Yeah," she said, "we are. Because whatever happened to us today, whatever's causing F-22s to fall from the sky in this valley, it ends now." They turned back toward Dragonfly Field, toward answers that had been buried for 30 years. And toward a truth that would change everything. The bunker entrance was exactly where Tommy had described it, 100 meters northwest of the crevasse, hidden beneath a collapsed section of old timber that had once been camouflaged netting stretched over a wooden frame. Sarah and Marcus pulled away the rotted boards, revealing a concrete shaft descending into darkness. "This is insane," Marcus muttered, but he was already pulling out his flashlight. "We just survived an impossible landing, rescued a kid from a crevasse, and now we're exploring abandoned Cold War bunkers. This is not how I thought my Tuesday would go." Sarah clicked on her own light and started down the metal ladder bolted to the shaft wall. The rungs were solid despite their age, and she descended carefully, counting steps. 4 meters down, just like Tommy had said, her boots hit concrete floor. The corridor stretched in both directions, lit by emergency lighting that glowed a sickly green. The power was definitely still on. Sarah could hear the hum of electrical systems, feel the slight vibration through the floor. Whoever had built this place had designed it to last. "Sarah, look at this." Marcus was examining a plaque mounted on the wall. "Project Dragonfly, classified, authorization level, top secret special access required, established 1985. They moved deeper into the facility, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The corridor was lined with doors, most of them closed and locked, but one stood open, the communications room Tommy had found. Sarah stepped inside, sweeping her light across the banks of equipment. It was more sophisticated than she'd expected. Not just radios, but what looked like signals intelligence gear, encryption equipment, even early computer systems with their green monochrome monitors. And in the center of it all, a chair still warm from where Tommy had been sitting before he fell into the crevasse. "He was here for hours," Sarah said softly, running her hand over the radio console. "Hurt, scared, alone, and instead of just calling for help for himself, he listened to our distress call and guided us to safety." Marcus was examining a wall map, its plastic overlay yellowed with age. "This shows the entire valley. And look, there are notations here. Test Flight 1, dual engine failure, altitude 9,000 m. Test Flight 2, dual engine failure, altitude 9,000 m. Sarah, there are dozens of these entries, all engine failures, all at exactly 9,000 meters. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. She moved to a filing cabinet in the corner, pulling open drawers. Inside were folders, hundreds of them, all marked with classification stamps. She grabbed one at random and opened it. The documents inside made her blood run cold. Project Dragonfly was a propulsion research program, Sarah read aloud. They were testing a revolutionary new engine design here, some kind of adaptive thrust vectoring system that could theoretically give F-22s unprecedented maneuverability. But something went wrong. Marcus pulled out another file. "Listen to this. Test Subject 7 experienced catastrophic dual engine failure at 9,000 meters during approach to Dragonfly Field. Pilot successfully landed aircraft using emergency procedures. Post-flight analysis revealed complete electromagnetic shutdown of engine control systems. Cause unknown." Sarah flipped through more documents, her hands shaking. It happened over and over. Every test flight that came through this valley at 9,000 meters experienced the same thing. They couldn't figure out why. The engines would just die, both of them, simultaneously. Some pilots made it down, some didn't. "Here," Marcus thrust a document at her. "Final report, dated June 1990. After extensive investigation, we have determined that the valley contains a natural electromagnetic anomaly, possibly related to mineral deposits in the surrounding mountains. This anomaly creates a focused M pulse at approximately 9,000 meters altitude that interferes with the F-22's fly-by-wire engine control systems, causing complete shutdown. Recommendation: abandon Project Dragonfly, close facility, classify all records, ensure no future flight operations occur in this valley." Sarah's mind reeled. They knew this valley was dangerous, that it could kill pilots, and they just buried it, classified everything. erased Dragonfly Field from existence and hoped no one would ever fly through here again. But we did, Marcus said quietly. We flew right through the danger zone, testing new communication systems. And the same thing that killed pilots 30 years ago almost killed us today. Sarah thought of David Reeves standing on the runway in that photograph, smiling and proud. Tommy's father. He must have experienced it too. He survived a dual-engine failure here. He wrote about it in his logbook. But then 5 days after writing that final entry, he died in what they called a training accident. Marcus's face went pale. You think they killed him to keep the secret? I don't know, Sarah's voice was hard, but I'm going to find out. She gathered up every file she could carry, stuffing them into her survival pack. This was evidence of a cover-up, of pilots put at risk, of a danger that still existed and could kill more people if it wasn't addressed. We need to get back to base, Sarah said. We need to report this. They climbed back up the shaft and started the long trek back to Dragonfly Field. By the time they reached the runway, the sun was past its zenith, and Sarah could hear the distinctive sound of helicopters approaching. 2 HH-60 Pave Hawks appeared over the valley rim, descending toward the runway. Sarah and Marcus stood beside their Raptors as the helicopters touched down, and a familiar figure jumped out, Colonel James Morrison, their squadron commander. Captain Chen, Lieutenant Webb. Morrison's face was grim. Are you injured? No, sir, we're fine, but we have a situation. Sarah spent the next 20 minutes briefing Morrison on everything they'd discovered: the electromagnetic anomaly, the covered-up research program, the files documenting decades of engine failures. The colonel's expression grew darker with each revelation. This is beyond my pay grade, Morrison said finally. Way beyond. We're going to need to involve Air Force safety, maybe even the Inspector General. But first, we need to get you two and those aircraft out of here. Sir, what about the boy, Tommy Reeves? Morrison's expression softened. He's at Providence, Alaska Medical Center in Anchorage. Doctors say he'll make a full recovery. Broken femur, severe hypothermia, but he's stable, conscious. Asking about you, actually. Relief flooded through Sarah. I want to see him, sir. You will, but first we deal with this. Morrison gestured at the files Sarah had brought back. Whatever was happening here, whatever they covered up, it ends today. No more pilots at risk, no more secrets. As maintenance crews began preparing the Raptors for recovery, they'd have to be towed out, their engines still dead from the electromagnetic pulse. Sarah stood on the runway and looked around Dragonfly Field one last time. This place had been built to test the future of aviation. Instead, it had become a graveyard for dreams and, for some, a literal graveyard. But it had also saved lives. David Reeves's life 15 years ago and Sarah's and Marcus's lives today. And it had given Tommy Reeves the chance to honor his father's legacy by saving the pilots his father had never gotten to meet. Captain, Marcus was beside her, his voice quiet. What Tommy did today, using his father's knowledge to save us, that's not just luck or coincidence. No, Sarah agreed. It's legacy. It's love reaching across death. It's a father protecting his son and anyone his son cared about, even from the grave. As the helicopters prepared to lift off, Sarah's radio crackled one last time. A civilian frequency, coming through on her helmet radio that she'd forgotten to remove. Captain Chen, the voice was weak but clear, Tommy calling from his hospital bed. Did you find the files? Sarah smiled. We found them, Tommy, and we're going to make sure everyone knows the truth, your father's story, what really happened here, all of it. Good, a pause then. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for saving our lives, Dragonfly 7. Your dad would be proud of you. I know I am. The radio went silent, but Sarah kept it close as they boarded the helicopter. Below them, Dragonfly Field fell away, its secrets finally exposed to the light. The rescue was complete. But the real work was just beginning. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the main hangar at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, watching as hundreds of people filed in for a ceremony that had taken weeks of bureaucratic wrangling to arrange. The October sun streamed through the massive hangar doors, illuminating the two F-22 Raptors that had made the impossible landing at Dragonfly Field, both now fully repaired and restored to flight status. But the real centerpiece of the ceremony sat front and center. Tommy Reeves, now walking with only a slight limp, dressed in a crisp white shirt and tie, his crutches leaned against his chair. His mother sat beside him, a woman Sarah had gotten to know well over the past months, a woman who'd raised her son alone, working double shifts as a nurse, keeping alive the memory of a husband she'd barely known but had loved completely. "Nervous?" Marcus whispered, appearing at Sarah's elbow in his dress uniform. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "I'm better at flying than public speaking." The hangar fell quiet as Colonel Morrison stepped to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow airmen, we are gathered here today to honor an extraordinary act of courage and to right a wrong that has stood for far too long." Sarah's mind drifted back to the whirlwind of the past 3 months. The investigation that had exploded across multiple agencies when they'd presented the Dragonfly Field files. Chinese letter of discovering that not just David Reeves, but 3 other pilots had died in training accidents, shortly after experiencing the electromagnetic anomaly, all their deaths now being re-examined. The quiet fury of the Air Force Safety Center when they realized a known hazard had been classified and hidden rather than addressed. The electromagnetic anomaly was real. A team of scientists from MIT and the Air Force Research Laboratory had spent 6 weeks in the valley, mapping the phenomenon. It was caused by a unique combination of mineral deposits, rare earth elements concentrated in the mountain walls, that created a natural electromagnetic pulse when aircraft with specific engine designs passed through at precisely 9,000 meters. The effect was narrow, localized, and had gone undetected for decades because flight paths rarely crossed that exact altitude in that exact location. Until Sarah and Marcus had done exactly that. The investigation into Project Dragonfly has revealed serious failures in safety protocols and oversight, Morrison continued. Those failures cost lives, but today, we ensure they will never cost lives again. All F-22 flight operations in this region now avoid the affected altitude band. The phenomenon has been mapped and documented, and Dragonfly Field, rather than remaining hidden, is being restored as an emergency landing facility, a resource that could save lives in the future. The crowd applauded, and Sarah saw Tommy's face light up. The restoration of Dragonfly Field had been his idea, pushed relentlessly through every channel until someone listened. The boy who'd fallen into a forgotten bunker had become the voice ensuring that forgotten place would serve a purpose again. "But more importantly," Morrison said, his voice softening, "we are here to honor 2 people whose courage and quick thinking prevented tragedy and exposed a truth that needed to be told." Sarah's stomach clenched as Morrison called her name. She walked to the center of the hangar, Marcus beside her, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes watching. But her gaze found Tommy's, and the boy gave her a thumbs up that made her smile. Morrison draped medals around their necks, Airman's Medals, the highest peacetime award for heroism. Sarah barely heard the citation, something about extraordinary heroism and voluntary risk of life, and actions that prevented the loss of Air Force assets and personnel. Then it was Tommy's turn. The teenager stood with visible effort, accepting his mother's steadying hand as he made his way to the center. He'd grown in the past 3 months, not just physically recovering, but growing into himself. The shy, wounded boy Sarah had mentored 5 years ago had become someone stronger, tempered by pain and loss into something remarkable. "Thomas David Reeves," Morrison's voice rang out. You are here today not just because you saved 2 pilots and 2 aircraft worth over $140 million. You are here because when you were injured, alone, and in mortal danger yourself, your first thought was to help others. You used knowledge passed down from a father you never met to guide pilots to safety. You honored his memory in the most profound way possible, by living the values he embodied. Morrison presented Tommy with a civilian medal for heroism, but Sarah knew the real moment was coming. She stepped forward, pulling a small velvet box from her pocket. "Tommy," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the silent hangar. "In my 12 years of flying, I've learned that the strongest bonds aren't formed in perfect conditions. They're forged in crisis, in impossible situations where people show who they really are. You showed me something that day. You showed me that courage isn't about having no fear. It's about being terrified and helping anyway." She opened the box, revealing the custom wings she'd commissioned. Silver dragonflies with wings spread in flight, each detail perfect, mounted on a presentation plaque. "These are for you. You're not just an honorary member of my squadron, you're family. Your call sign is officially Dragonfly 7, and as long as I'm flying, you've got a wingman." Tommy's eyes filled with tears as Sarah pinned the wings to his jacket. "Thank you, Captain," he whispered. Then louder, voice breaking, "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for trusting the impossible. Thank you for being brave enough to call out when you had every reason to stay silent," Sarah replied. The applause was deafening, but the ceremony wasn't quite over. Morrison raised his hand for silence. "One final announcement. The facility formerly known as Project Dragonfly will be officially renamed and recommissioned. From this day forward, it will be known as Reeves Field, in honor of Technical Sergeant David Reeves and his son Thomas Reeves, a father and son who, across the boundary of death itself, saved lives and exposed truths that needed to be told." Sarah saw Tommy's mother break down, tears streaming down her face. Sarah's own daughter Emma, now 9 years old and sitting in the front row, jumped up and ran to Tommy, throwing her arms around him in a hug that made the teenager blush. The two had become close over the past months. Emma idolized Tommy, and Tommy had become like an older brother to her. Sarah watched them together and saw the beautiful complexity of connections formed from tragedy, how loss and survival could weave people together in ways that felt like destiny. After the ceremony, as people mingled and photographers snapped pictures, Tommy pulled Sarah aside. "Captain, I got my acceptance letter yesterday." Sarah's heart leaped. "Air Force Academy." Tommy nodded, his face glowing. "Full appointment. I start next summer, and I already know what I want to fly." "F-22s." "No," Tommy smiled. "Search and rescue. I want to be the person who saves people when they fall out of the sky, like you saved me." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "Your dad would be so proud, Tommy. You know that, right?" "I know." Tommy pulled out the photograph, the one of David Reeves standing beside an F-22 at Dragonfly Field. "I carry this with me everywhere now. My mom says he left me more than just coordinates and knowledge. He left me a purpose, to help people, to be brave, to never give up, even when everything seems impossible." 6 months later, Sarah took Emma and Tommy on a trip to Reeves Field. The facility had been transformed, the runway repaired, the buildings restored, and a small permanent staff assigned to maintain it. A memorial stood at the entrance, a bronze statue of a dragonfly in flight, with plaques listing the names of the pilots who had died because of the covered-up electromagnetic anomaly. David Reeves's name was first on the list, his death reclassified from training accident to killed in action, operational security failure. Tommy stood before his father's name for a long time, his hand resting on the bronze plaque. "I wish I could have known him," he said quietly. "You do know him," Sarah said. "You know him through every choice you make, every person you help, every time you choose courage over fear. He's in you, Tommy. He always has been." That evening, as the sun set over the valley, Sarah filed her flight plan for a training run. But this wasn't just any flight. Marcus was her wingman, and in the back seat of Sarah's two-seat F-22D sat a special passenger, Tommy Reeves, experiencing his first flight in a fighter jet. "Dragonfly 7, you ready?" Sarah asked through the intercom. "Ready, Dragonfly 6, Tommy replied, his voice trembling with excitement. They took off from Reeves Field, the runway that had saved Sarah's life now launching her into the sky once more. As they climbed through the mountains, Sarah made sure to avoid 9,000 meters over the valley. The electromagnetic anomaly was now well documented, charted, and avoided by all military flights. At 12,000 meters, Sarah leveled off and looked back at Tommy through the mirror. The boy, no, the young man, was staring out at the world below with an expression of pure wonder. "How does it feel?" Sarah asked. "Like flying," Tommy said. "Like my dad is flying with me." Sarah rolled the aircraft gently, and Tommy whooped with joy. Beside them, Marcus's Raptor tucked into formation, and Sarah could see him waving. "Tommy," Sarah said, "your dad left you a message in that logbook. Do you remember what it said?" "Be like a dragonfly," Tommy recited. "They can fly in any direction. They're survivors." "That's right, and you are. You're a survivor, a hero, and someday you're going to be one hell of a pilot." As they flew over Reeves Field, Sarah waggled her wings in salute. The gesture Tommy had learned to return during his academy preparation. Below them, the facility that had been forgotten and feared was now a beacon of safety, a place of redemption. The call sign that had connected a captain to a child 5 years ago had saved 3 lives and exposed a decades-old cover-up. It had restored a father's honor and given his son a purpose. It had turned tragedy into triumph and created a bond that would last forever. Sarah Chen had taught Tommy Reeves about flying, but Tommy had taught Sarah something far more important, that the connections we make, the knowledge we pass on, and the courage we inspire can echo across time and space, saving lives we never knew needed saving. Dragonfly 6 and Dragonfly 7, separated by a generation, united by courage, bound forever by the impossible day when engines failed at 9,000 meters, and a child's voice called out from the darkness. And in the Alaskan wilderness, Reeves Field stood watch, no longer a secret, no longer a graveyard, but a testament to the truth that love and legacy can transcend even death itself. The story had come full circle, but the legacy was just beginning.